This video is on question 21 of the 2012 TSA, and here we're asked which option is the best statement of the flaw in the argument. And this is the passage that we're dealing with. The author first says that the problem of insect pests on crops is a difficult one. And it's often solved by spraying crops with pesticides. The author says, however, these also kill many other insects, which survive by feeding on the pests that we're trying to kill. And it would be better to stop wasting money on pesticides and let these other insects control the problem for us. So that's the passage we're dealing with. So what kind of sentences are we given? Well, in the first sentence, the author addresses a problem, or sets out the problem to address. And in the second part of the first sentence, they give a solution which is a bad solution, so it's really not a solution. They then give a reason for this claim about why it's not a solution, but before providing their own solution. And you might recall, if you've seen the videos on the questions where we're asked to pick the option which best expresses the conclusion, that when we have a solution, the solution is normally the conclusion. So we can regard sentence 4 as the conclusion. Now, every argument consists in a set of reasons and a conclusion. So it's on these two boxes at the bottom which we want to focus. So I've isolated these two boxes, and let's see what each is saying in simple form. Well, what's the reason saying? Essentially, it's saying this: pesticides have a disadvantage. There's a bit more detail, but this simple approach allows us to grasp the argument more clearly. And this reason is used to support a conclusion. What's the conclusion saying? Well, in simple terms, insects are preferable for controlling the problem. So the argument goes something like this: pesticides have a disadvantage, therefore insects are preferable. Can you see a flaw in this argument? Well, just because pesticides have a disadvantage, it doesn't mean that insects are necessarily preferable. Why not? Well, because pesticides may also have an advantage over insects. So this seems to be a flaw in the argument. And we're going to have a look at the options now and see if there's one which comes close to this. So here we have our options, and here we have our proposed flaw. Now, can you see an option which matches our proposed flaw? Well, option A seems to come very close. It says that pesticides may be more effective than these other insects at controlling the problem of insect pests on crops. In other words, although pesticides kill other insects, which feed on the pests that the pesticides kill directly, pesticides may also have an advantage. Namely, they may be more effective than these other insects. So A looks like it's going to be the right option, but let's check the other options just in case. What's B saying? Well, it's saying that there are other problems associated with pesticides, besides the problem that it kills these other insects. Well, what is the author saying? They're saying that insects are preferable. And if there are other problems associated with pesticides that the author hasn't discussed, then it seems there's even more reason to believe that insects are preferable. So option B seems to actually strengthen the argument. What about option C? This says that the author's argument fails to establish that using insects rather than pesticides has a positive effect. Well, let's have a look back at the argument. The author is saying that if we use pesticides, they have this disadvantage, and these other insects will be killed. Whereas if we use these other insects, then these other insects won't be killed. And so the author does seem to establish that using insects over pesticides has a positive effect. So C is just wrong. Looking now at option D, this says that the argument fails to establish that there are problems for the crops presented by these other insects. Now, that the author fails to discuss any other problems presented by using insects, if anything, makes it more likely that there aren't any such problems, which would give one a stronger reason to use insects over pesticides and thus strengthen the argument. Lastly, option E says that the argument fails to justify its claim that pests on crops present a problem. Now, it's true that the author doesn't give an explanation of why pests on crops present a problem. However, it's pretty obvious that they do present a problem, which is why they're being called pests, and it's pretty clear what this problem could be. For example, that they are consuming these crops, or damaging them in some way. And so it doesn't seem that important for the author to provide such an explanation. In other words, E doesn't seem that relevant. And that leaves option A as the correct option.